Welcome everyone. Welcome back to the plenary session on plastic waste. To kick off our plenary discussion and to set the context, we will shortly screen the documentary Trapped by Plastic featuring Mandy Barker. Many of you will probably have seen Mandy in the opening session and have seen her stark and strong images and even stronger call to action. This is a first move production, and I'm very honored that the director is actually here with us in backstage and will be viewing, reading your questions and fielding them to me for the discussion later on. You have the privilege to be among the very few people who have the opportunity to see the film before everyone else, because the film is right now being submitted to several festivals in Europe. So please sit back, and I will see you back in 10 minutes when we start with the plenary session.
I have had people cry in my exhibitions, which is a good thing. Hopefully this is the power of my work, because although it's an attractive image, by reading what it represents, this is almost like a stab in the back. It's the shock that I want people to feel. Enough for them to take action and want to do more. This collection here is from Henderson Island, which is one of the most remote places in the world. It was horrific to see the amount of debris that was washing up on the shore there. I found 45 different brands from 25 different countries, which is particularly horrific when you think that these places are more than 5,000 kilometres away from this island. There's a lot of products here that I found that are also they're recyclable, but what are they doing on Henderson Island? My duty.
Wow, what an amazing story and what an amazing pictures of Mandy Barker's work. I hope you had the opportunity to view this, and for those who view the recording, the link will actually be to the trailer, because as said, the film is currently running at several festivals. So I do hope that this film leaves you with that strong fire in the belly to do something about that, because we need all of you. We often talk about the need for systemic change to happen, and of course we need systemic change to solve the plastic pollution problem. However, systems, organizations, businesses, they are made up of people like you and me, and like people like Mandy. Mandy chose to use her creativity, her photographer's eye, and her strong wish to drive positive change to call for action. We all have the opportunity to do that. We all have the opportunity to use our own competences and capabilities to do exactly that. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Truus Huisman. I've worked for 30 years in communications and sustainable business, and I have landed now with the IKEA Foundation, where I'm leading communications. Before that, I worked for Unilever, and that's where I experienced my defining moment in life. And that's when the CEO at the time, Paul Polman, asked a bunch of us, both within the business but also outside and in other organizations, to develop new sustainable business models to tackle the big plastic pollution challenge. So that's exactly what we wanted to do, but we didn't only want to focus on the plastic pollution as such, but also on all of those people, millions of people who work on the plastic waste collection day in, day out. They expose themselves to the hazards through the plastic chemicals and pollutants, and they in fact are good for around 20% of all the plastic waste that gets collected. Now, not nearly enough of plastic waste gets recycled. We know that's only about 9 to 10%, but of that 9 to 10%, waste pickers across the world play a super important role, but they don't receive the recognition, not from society, nor in monetary terms. So what we wanted to do is talk exactly with those people, in particular women, because women are the most vulnerable group in that group of waste pickers. And so one day we were sitting with those women waste pickers in their cooperative next to one of the largest landfills in Mumbai, India, and we were talking about how could we give greater value to plastic waste? How could we, in other words, upcycle, give more value rather than downcycle plastics? And suddenly their eyes lit up and they got it. They understood how they could be part of the solution. So, dear viewers, that has been the moment where I felt, and I was determined, that I owe it to these courageous women to do whatever I can do to contribute to enable these women, these waste pickers, to have a better livelihood and do this in a way where we ensure a livable future, a livable planet for the future generations to come. And so that brought me here today. And this afternoon, we will be discussing with an amazing panel the question, what can we do to accelerate the pace of reducing plastic waste entering into the oceans? So this afternoon, I have here with me the Director General of DG Environment, Florika Fink-Hoyer. Very welcome. We have Eric Lindebjerg, who's leading plastic waste issue management within WWF. We have Lola Fayukun, who is a youth activist, and I'm so pleased to have you and that you have a seat around the table here this afternoon. We have Willemijn Peters, who is an entrepreneur and who I got to know a few years back in Malta at the Ocean Confront, and I am hugely admiring how she is turning indeed plastic waste into new objects, into new life. And last but not least, Eva Zebi. Warm welcome. Eva is leading the organization Business for Nature. A very warm welcome to the panelists, but also I'm very, very pleased to introduce to you our graphic facilitator, Sylvia. Sylvia, I'm really curious of what start you made in visualizing our discussions this afternoon. I'd love to see the start of your work. And we will come back to you a few times later this afternoon where you can show us how your work is developing as we are discussing. So, dear panelists, as we heard, our personal stories and our personal journeys are often so inspiring for our viewers. So I'd love to hear from you what actually has been your story. How did you end up in the job and in the work and the passion where you are currently in? So let me start with Eva. Eva, can you explain us in a few minutes what led you to the organization you are currently working in?
Well, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here, but I have to admit I'm really very touched and moved by Mandy Barker's film. It's just so powerful in terms of also how interconnected we all are and how much we all depend on nature. So, but to answer your question, I guess as a child, I've just always been quite concerned with animal welfare and wildlife conservation. I didn't grow up in a family that was always outdoors, but I just had a strong sense of, yes, animal well-being, I would say. So I had my Greenpeace mug and my Body Shop backpack, and when I was 13, I became vegetarian, which was quite unusual at the time where I lived. So anyway, fast forward a bit, I then studied ecology, and it was during my master's in environmental management where I really had a bit of a moment. That was when one of my professors was basically made a few comments that showed that he had so much distrust, and practically he was a bit dismissive about business efforts on anything environmental. In particular, it was a company with a big footprint and trying to act on biodiversity. And it's not that what he was saying was not founded, because of course companies could always do more, but it was more that it actually made me quite sad, because as you know, he was talking and influencing maybe in an unintended way, these young, smart students. And instead of helping us think through, well, how are we going to solve this? It was just pointing fingers. So basically, I decided at that point, well, I guess we all go through this. Do you decide you're going to try and influence from the outside in and put the pressure on, or are you going to go in from the inside out? And at that point, I thought, well, and I'd quite like to overcome this and see how I can get closer to business, to see how business, which is such a big part of the problem, can also then transform to be part of the solution. So that's, you know, how it then progressed. And later on, I spent 15 years at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, working with hundreds of companies and many organizations on a number of projects. And there we go. And then, you know, now I'm leading Business for Nature, which on my journey was very much the next step that I felt that I could help contribute to something bigger, which was the regulatory environment. So in a way, we all need to demonstrate that leadership and courage and give each other that courage to go even further, because what we're talking about is not just a transition, but a transformation, as you were saying, Truce. So there we go. That's a little bit of my story. I don't know if that's what you were hoping for. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Let me turn now to Eirik. So, Eirik, what brought you to WWF?
Like Eva, I think my story also goes a long way back. Ever since I was a small child, I grew up on the west coast of Norway, and I spent most of my first 10 years fishing with my dad. So I think from very early on, I had this very strong connection and curiosity about life below water, and that slowly developed, I think, more and more as I was growing up, more and more to a consciousness about our dependency on nature and how important nature is for us, and how nature then is being destroyed piece by piece, whether it was through building a new road in my neighborhood, building new houses where there used to be forests, or whether it was finding more and more pieces of plastic pollution out on the fishing trips. So from that moment on, I decided to devote my career to find solutions to protect the environment. And while I think I was the odd kid out when a lot of the other boys said they wanted to become football players or policemen, I said a biologist. I never became a biologist, but I'm now working through policy work instead, and leading WWF's policy work on plastic pollution globally in order to protect nature.
Wow. I think you did the right thing in choosing for the path you're on right now. We need people like you. Let me turn now to Lola. Lola, you're a young person. You have your future in front of you. There would be so many other ways you could invest in your future. Why did you decide to become an activist, a campaigner?
Yes, it almost wasn't a decision, really. It was something that I guess I ended up falling into. I remember a couple of years ago when Greta Thunberg was starting to emerge on the scene, and there was this burgeoning conversation about the Green New Deal. I was starting to reconsider a lot of what I'd been taught about climate change, which was that it was essentially a cordoned off issue which could be addressed in geography lessons and then never really thought about again, because it was going to affect future generations. You know, we were talking about my grandchildren or my great-grandchildren with no kind of recognition of the fact that it was affecting people at that very time that we were having that conversation. And so I was starting to think back on what I'd been taught and the way that the issue had kind of been framed to me. And when I realized that that framing was incredibly far from the truth. It obviously was a cause for a lot of concern for me. And so I started thinking, you know, what is it that we can do about this? I'd been involved in some other political stuff before, but I started to become really kind of disillusioned about the fact that this issue that I'd been taught about in a particular way seemed to just be, it seemed like I felt like I'd been lied to, like I'd had my head in the sand, and that people had been wanting me to keep it there almost. But it kind of at the perfect time, I started to see these different actors emerging, as I mentioned, with the climate strike starting, and with this more of a serious policy conversation emerging in that terms of the political conversation as well, and the mainstream political conversation. And that was when I decided to attend my first climate strike. And I will never forget the way that I felt when I was standing in the streets with, you know, a bunch of other people my age, school children, young people, toddlers with their parents, entire classrooms that had come out for a day. And I saw, you know, all of these banners and placards which seemed to represent more of an accurate picture of the issue than the one that I'd been taught when I was growing up. These chants and energy which represented that what we require is systemic change, as we've detailed, and that understands that all of us have, in turning out, we all demonstrated that we understood that even though we need systemic change, all of us can play a part in that, and need to call for that to happen and to demand that rather than waiting for it. So I feel like I've been talking for a really long time, so I'll wrap up. But yeah, it was after that I got involved in the behind the scenes elements of the climate strike with organizing, and then started to think more about the intersectional nature of the climate crisis, starting to think more about fossil fuels and plastics and all this kind of thing, and what we can do to incentivize change across all different aspects of society. So that's my story, I guess.
Yeah. Wonderful to hear, and the depth of your reflection. Thank you for sharing that with us, Lola. Turning to Willemijn now, and Willemijn, you, I think, have entrepreneurship in your DNA, but there are so many different ways you can run a business and do different, run different types of businesses and perhaps make a lot more money too. So what made you decide to start and be the founder of Serious Business, which I realized I didn't mention earlier, Serious Business with SEA, of course. What was your journey?
I think what I share with Eva and Eric is an intrinsic motivation to leave the world a better place. If it's just for the money, eventually what are you being remembered for? That's what totally went through my head. I used to be a business controller at Philips, indeed talking about big budgets, but it didn't move me. It didn't, at the end, you don't want to be remembered for the 0.001% in margin improvement, right? So I wanted to do something that would actually make a difference, a positive difference. And I started working for different organizations that would work together with front runners in business. So really use business as agents of change for a positive impact on our Earth. If you look at our Earth, 70% is ocean. So for me, ocean has always been a fascinating area. Like this ecosystem is so vital for our humans, us as humans as well. Extra sparked, of course, by my hero, Sylvia Earle. I suddenly realized that if I really, truly want to make a difference in the area that I feel most passionate about, which is the ocean, I should move into doing something that I'm good at. So combining what I'm good at with my passion. And what I'm good at is influencing businesses towards a more corporate social responsibility, actually doing something at the core of their business. And that's how I started Serious Business, to prevent plastic from entering our ocean. So really upstream, working together with the producers, the major users of plastics, and trying to have that systemic change.
Wow, super cool. But last but not least, Florica, you asked actually when we discussed this question to be at the last, so that's why I said last but not very least. So Florica, I know you have a very interesting story.
No, I don't think so. On the contrary, that's why I said I should be last, because mine is rather boring, because I'm a civil servant at the European Commission since 30 years. But I entered the European Commission because I believe very much in the European project and the goal of integration. And I had the chance indeed to work on a lot of policies which are relevant for individuals, like disaster risk management, emergency response, security policy, but also humanitarian aid. And when you were just talking about the Indian waste pickers, indeed, I had a bit of a flashback, because when I was in humanitarian aid in some time ago now, at the time of the big famine in the Horn of Africa, in Dadaab, which at that time was the biggest refugee camp, there were plastic bags everywhere. And we all came back really shocked by that. Later, not only us, but with others, also from the UN system and others, we turned into this idea of cash for work, so that you collect the plastic bags, which is of course much more meaningful. But now I'm heading the DG Environment, so the service which has some responsibilities under the Green Deal. The Green Deal is certainly a value project under the European Union, and I'm quite happy to be there. But there's one thing perhaps I have to say, when others said, everybody has its role. And what I realized, for instance, also in the context of conflict management, I was once responsible for the Kimberley process. I realized that over the years, when you want to go for transformative change, you need many actors. And it always normally starts, this transformative change, with an individual or with civil society. But somewhere along the line, somewhere you need what I would call a regulator, somebody who translates that vision into a norm, into a legislation. And that's what we in the Commission are relatively good at, and we do. And I think that's where we can put, plastic is a big part of the European Green Deal. And I think that's where we come in, and we can make our little contribution to change and to lead to this transformative change where we consume and produce differently and where we have less plastic. And that's basically where I hope my colleagues, potentially myself, certainly my commissioner and the president, can make a difference.
Absolutely, and that was exactly why I thought your story was so interesting, because often we look at our role as part of a bigger machine, and it can look at first sight boring, but they are essential jobs. We need the legislators, because without legislation we don't have the framework in which we give the guidance to businesses on how they can do good and can do better. So thank you for that contribution. And we need, indeed, all of us, we need those contributions, because the size of the problem is enormous, as we know that from a recent study from the Pew's Charitable Trust. The numbers don't look good. If the trend moves as it does now, we will actually see, even if we take into account the measures we have already agreed to, we see only a 7%, a small 7% reduction of plastic waste towards 2040. So we need to step up, and that brings me to the next question. And the next question is about zooming out. And if you look at your position in your organization or in society, what do you see as your principal role and responsibility? And I think I will start with you, Florica, because it builds nicely on what you ended with. What do you see as your principal role? And what are the main obstacles, roadblocks, and where would you want others to come in and do their bit? So Florica, I can indeed start with you this time to allow you to continue on your previous contribution.
I would put that in the context of plastic litter, plastic problem, the plastic waste problem, because where I stopped was indeed to say we need actually a very holistic approach with lots of stakeholders, because if you want to address all the sources also of the pathways of plastic litter and microplastics, it was already said, we also have to look at the waste stream. the wastewater stream, shipping, fishing, aquaculture, and it's all about prevention actually. And the plastic sector is a sector where we would say there is a high potential for circularity. And that's where we actually would start. Now, circularity you don't achieve easily, and it needs huge investments. And it's not easy to make people move, especially industry. But I think what we managed with putting out rather strong legislation, think about, we started with this plastic strategy in 2018. And then from there, we had, for instance, the one on fishing gear, the directive, so as to collect that, or the single-use plastic. I think that was very important, and for us, a very, very important legislation, where we now ban really 10 products which litter the most, basically 7% of all marine litter linked to these 10, the plastic straws and the cups and so on. And actually, this week, we had put out guidelines, which makes it probably even stronger, not easier for industry, but they adapt, they do adapt, and not all lightheartedly, but they do. And potentially today I got from one very big brand an information that they will stop using this reusable cups, and they will go into different types of reusable cups and not single-use cups. That's why I wanted to say. So I was very happy when I received this information today. And okay, it's a long-term goal. They do it until 25, but I understand also these are changes in their production process. I think where we look at as well very much is plastic bottles. We have we have imposed certain recycled content, eco-design and collection targets, which are important for municipalities, for member states. And we watch on that, and we go also on infringement procedures, and implementation is a big issue. Not all are lining up, but we do. It's the same with incinerator, with landfill. But we also work on the microplastic. I think that's extremely important. I think that becomes much more to the forefront of minds of people. Mandy was very clear in her film, because we all realized, and that I found very powerful in that film, she confronts us with our own responsibility, because we all use potentially a plastic toothbrush, and I will change that. But there are small steps everybody can change. My daughter already uses another one, but okay, I can always learn from my children. But I mean, intentionally added microplastics, this is something where we make a restriction under REACH. I already mentioned the recycling targets. I mean, you can go on and on, but what we now do is we look at different sectors of industry which have this circularity potential, and where we will want to go for a design that is done, a product is designed from the start to be reused, upgraded, recycled, and you have to start at the design phase. And then, of course, we have a chemical strategy. We look at hazardous chemicals and so on and so on. You could go on, but what I realized is we need to be making much more awareness rising, but I think that is changing also thanks to films, powerful films like from Mandy, but we had others on Netflix like Seaspiracy. I think a new generation comes and they are confronted with this, and they would not accept it because it's their future, but also the current, also the boomers and the other millennials. But I think what is a big driver is investment. And here with taxonomy, we have put out what are the green investment possibilities. And that is also a very powerful leverage. I'm stopping there because, sorry, I could talk a lot. So I will stop here, sorry.
Well, it's fantastic to hear all the areas the Commission is indeed working on, and designing us into circularity, I think, is a key part of that. You mentioned the next generation, so that brings me actually back to Lola. I think we have created quite a mess for the next generation, it seems, for the current young generation, I should say, and the next generation. But I think you have one big advantage over us, maybe I should call myself the boomer generation, is that you have started to learn to think exponentially. I think we've grown up very much in terms of linear thinking. We know that the solutions we require need to be exponential solutions, And that has been part of you growing up. So I'm really keen on also hearing from you how you see your role and responsibility as the young generation, and indeed, what do you call and what do you expect from others? Laura, please take it away.
Yeah, I feel like a large part of our role is holding a lot of people's feet to the fire, essentially. You know, as we've already like touched on, a lot of money and energy needs to go towards protecting our planet and protecting young people's futures. And unless we have a lot of resources going in a particular direction incredibly rapidly, things aren't going to go in the direction that they need to, even if, you know, we're making individual changes. And so I think we see our responsibility as changing things in our lives, doing things where we can, but also understanding that we as individuals have the power when we come together in community, and when we actually understand the power that we have and attempt to use it to force those who have the resources to direct the change that we need to see, to use those resources and use that power that they have to affect change on a greater level than obviously any of us can do individually, but we can do when we start to understand the positions that we occupy within the systems that we want to see change across. So I think that that's how we kind of see our, at least I can't speak for everyone, but at least how I and a lot of people that I work with see what we can do, which is really understanding the holistic nature of these issues that we're dealing with and trying to affect change across as many of those different elements and like stakeholders as we can, and really making the moral and urgent case for action across the board.
Very powerful. And can I then turn to Eva? Can you share with us and the audience your thoughts about what your role is and what you would like to see others to do?
Sure. And in fact, you know, from a business perspective, maybe I'll just say a few things about what businesses can do now overall to help reverse nature loss and be on a nature positive journey, and then maybe reflect on this really interesting exchange we're having around the systems transformation and, in fact, the broader accountability system that we're all part of, which is composed of so many actors. And just on what Florica and Lola were just saying is, essentially, if social norms change, they change faster than regulation can change, but then regulation kicks in to then ensure that there is a level playing field and everyone then progresses to the next level, like the examples, you know, Florica was just giving with single-use plastic, et cetera, but that it's the Lolas of this world that are kicking off that social norm change. And companies are really listening to that, actually, because they know that these are their future customers, and that's the market trends that are changing. So they need to be ready for that. So anyway, just to very quickly, 4 things that all companies need to do. We try to simplify in business for nature. Not that all the steps are easy to take, though, but number 1 is assess their most material impacts and dependencies on nature. And that includes not only measuring, but valuing how important those impacts are for the planet and for people. If you look at plastic, that means you've understood the true value of the negative impacts, but also the positive value of recycled material in a circular economy that needs to be recognized. Just as an example of efforts being undertaken right now, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, just as an example, is developing metrics for companies to standardize how companies can measure, manage, and report plastics usage and circularity. It's interesting that these developments are taking place. So number 1 is assess. Number 2, then companies must commit. Be bold, commit to ambitious goals and set science-based targets to make sure that your company is operating within the Earth's limits. It's really cool. We now have the science-based targets for nature that's provided initial guidance, and more will come for oceans, land, water, and biodiversity. And many companies, as we know, are making commitments, including on plastics and plastic waste. The problem is that on plastics, even if all businesses that had committed fully met their current commitments, there will still be more and more plastic leakage into the ocean. So we know that commitments alone won't cut it. Number 3 then is act. So all companies need to act right now to avoid and reduce their negative impacts, but then regenerate and restore and transform. And that's the exciting language when you talk about innovation in companies. So just one example from one of the programs of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste is also what Foraker was talking about, is the design for circularity, improving the front-end design of products to make sure that you can have maximum recovery of plastics at the end. And then number 4 is advocate. So this is where companies are maybe earlier on their journey sometimes, but companies can advocate for that ambitious government policy that will then scale and speed up even more business action on the ground. And I really think that there is so much momentum and interest in the business community on reversing nature loss as a whole, including plastics. We've never seen this before. So we now have more than 800 companies urging governments to adopt policies now to reverse nature loss in this decade. Those that have signed the Nature is Everyone's Business call to action. We've got the Leaders Pledge for Nature countries. There is this momentum. So there are no excuses right now for businesses not to start. And what I just wanted to share in 3 words about the systems transformation, it boils down to the rules of the game. If you change the rules of the game, business doesn't operate in a vacuum. It operates within, those rules. And so, 1, we need to change the regulatory rules. And as a very high level, just like for climate, we now need the transformative global agreement on nature at the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, COP15. That gives the companies the certainty to invest long term, to innovate and to shift their business models. We know that. Number 2 is we need to change the financial and economic rules of the game, which is what Foraker was mentioning. Investors should stop investing in activities that have a highly negative impact on climate and biodiversity in the oceans. We know that. And all about the disclosure. I won't spend more time, but it means investment in infrastructure also on the plastic side, because many communities in Asia, in Africa, don't have the systems yet to collect and manage the plastic weight or increase that recycling. And that requires the financial upfront investment as well. And then finally, the 3rd one is changing the internal business management rules. So how companies actually make decisions, how they manage and assess risk, how, their procurement, their pension plans, their investment, their budget allocations, et cetera, all of these processes need to embed the real value of nature and people in them, so that ultimately they're making better decisions and the disclosure reflects the actual impact of the company. So there we go, lots of stuff to do, but we've never before, I'll end on a high note, which is we've never seen this level of engagement in the business community, never, around nature, around plastics, about oceans, about people. We've got to use this, we've got to go further, tackle some of the thornier issues, like eliminating harmful subsidies, which is about the full systems transformation. Thank you.
Yeah, Eva, and that indeed stems me very positive and optimistic. If the business community puts its weight behind this, change can happen. We've seen that, of course, on the climate side at the Paris agreements, and we need business to step up more. And that is the logical segue then to Willemijn. Please share your views with us, Willemijn.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting that Eva mentioned changing the game, because what we try to do with Serious Business and our clients is making a difference in the world of plastics, really as game changers. So then you are changing the game. And I think you need that role also for legislators to create an example which they can build legislation on. A lot of times companies tell us there's this upcoming legislation and we don't know how, so help us with the how. Yeah. There's a lot of pointing fingers, but nobody tells us how to do it. So then we tell them how to do it. But even more interesting is it when companies see they have to move and there's no legislation yet. And I always say it's better to steer than to be steered, because if you can steer, you can set up a new system without any plastic leakage in a way that's also profitable for business. I think what stands out, if you can actually make sure that you can keep plastics in the economy and outside of the environment, and this will actually save you money, or this will be more profitable than the conventional business model, then there's a big trigger for companies to change. Not all of them. Some companies are indeed, like I talked to a retailer recently, and they said, we don't believe that reusable packaging will ever play a major role in our business. I think the day after, France announced that 1/5 of all shopping space should be refill zone. So some are very hesitant to change. And then you show how you do it with others that are competing in that same industry, and they will actually benefit much more. And I think that's the role we're playing with frontrunners, showing how you can do it and how you can also turn this into a positive business case. And then legislators just kind of come in and create, again, that level playing field. And consumers can vote with their wallet every day, so they can choose the products that suit them best and that are part of a circular economy. So I think that's all combined, and you need the NGOs and the research institutes to show, like, make informed decisions, but also make that, like, encourage that market push. So then you can really make that change happen all together with the different actors.
Yeah, and talking about NGOs, let me then turn to Eric. You are WWF, or you represent WWF, and you have been working very hard on the plastics issue, of course. And so how do you, with a bit of reflection on the different contributions, what is your take on this?
Thanks. I think, I mean, as we've seen in the film, plastic pollution is a problem that is increasing at an accelerating pace. So I think we shouldn't forget about that we're currently heading full speed in the wrong direction. But what I think is that, you know, the momentum and the opportunity to change that direction dramatically exists. And that has, I think, been explained well by many of my colleagues in the panel here. I think we're at the stage with plastic pollution where the technical solution often are there or are not that complicated. Sometimes it's changing a business model. Sometimes it's redesigning a product. Many times it's changing the material of what that product will be made out of. But it's not rocket science. Also, the front runners, some of which those that Willemijn work with and Eva has in her coalition, they exist as well. There's a lot of interest in the business community to really make the step and create the change. However, the challenge is to make all those solutions mainstream and make that the new standard. And I think that's where legislation come in. We need strong regulatory frameworks, both nationally, regionally, like within the EU, and also globally. And currently plastic pollution is, I would say, completely unregulated globally. We don't have a global agreement on plastic pollution the way we have Paris for climate and we have Montreal for CFCs, etc. But plastic pollution is completely unregulated at the global level. There are no global standards on product design. There's no harmonized way for countries to even report, so we don't even know how much plastic pollution is leaking into nature at the global scale every year. So I think this has to change. So we as WWF, together with a lot of other NGOs and others, are calling for a new legally binding treaty on plastic pollution. And we see an enormous interest and momentum. I think plastic pollution, the interest among citizens have been just amazing over the last couple of years. Really, really, we can see that people want this change to happen. There is such a strong demand for change. We launched our global campaign a couple of years ago on plastic pollution, and we also launched a global petition for a global treaty, and we now have over 2 million people having signed that petition, and we've never seen such a fast growth in a petition. And also some good news. Just 2 days ago at the UN in New York, 75 governments declared, made a new declaration calling for such a legally binding treaty. And interestingly enough, it was led by the Alliance of Small Island States, which are some of those who are most deeply affected by it. So we see the momentum growing, recognizing the big challenge, and through the work that we do as a global NGO, I mean, we're present in more than 100 countries, and we do a lot of different projects at the local level to try to stop plastic pollution on the ground. And throughout the globe, we see this huge demand for change, and we see this need for making solutions become mainstream.
Wow, that's amazing. The petition that you've managed to launch and the support that shows that there is a movement growing, I guess. So we will shortly turn to the audience questions. But before we do that, I'd love to see what Sylvia has made of this and how she has captured the discussions thus far. So let me turn to Sylvia. And Sylvia, can you share some of your work?
Yes.
Look, yes. That is amazing. Yes, some very powerful, I think, representation here. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, and we will come back to you at the end of the session, of course. So let me check what the audience, we have a few minutes for audience questions. I can see that there has been a question which I think I will field to Willemijn. And it says, doesn't ending plastic involve putting responsibility firmly with producers? And what could that mean in practice? Perhaps you would want to answer that question?
Of course, I think you see a lot of the dynamics in the conversation, in the communication as well, changing from having a sort of a blame on consumers towards leaning more towards responsibility for producers. So producers really need to be held accountable for plastics they put on the market. Yes, that would be a big difference. Then again, if there's no trigger, like a true pricing mechanism or a tax or some kind of way to really have this true pricing and the cost of nature in, there's not going to be a self-regulating mechanism among companies. So you need legislators to create a level playing field. But I think the solution is indeed with companies. They are quick and agile. They can change. You've seen this in the COVID disaster as well. A lot of companies suddenly could switch their machinery, their packaging lines to different kind of products. So there's a lot of agility within the industry, and I think we need to just put in the right triggers for them to change both their behavior and their operations, and then you will see that there's a lot happening. If you have, for instance, a percentage of mandatory recycled content, this already creates a big push, and there's different elements that could actually play a big role. So indeed, there's lots of responsibility with the producers, and they can do a lot.
Unfortunately, I think we have only time for one more question. I'd love to, I have many more on my list. And dear viewers, of course, we will try to come back to you on some of the comments and questions you've raised. We will share that with the panelists, and we will try to answer those questions as much as possible. But I would love to ask Lola the last question. We heard a lot about business, and I think there are some very encouraging developments in business. But one of the questions I received is, do you trust business, and what would it take for you to trust business more?
I think it's a question I've been asked before, and I always find it kind of difficult to answer, because I think that ultimately the business is not like, it doesn't stand on its own. It stands as part of society, and it comes down to not whether I trust just businesses, but whether I trust society as a whole to take action, because it's not, you know, as we've just been discussed, business isn't going to act like, we can't expect all of business to act on its own. There need to be systems around that which push that action, and that comes from everyone from legislators to campaigners working to ensure that business actually does what it's supposed to do. So if business existed on its own, like, I wouldn't trust it to, but I trust that as a society we will demand that action is taken, and then we will actually put the structures in place to ensure that business acts for the promotion of the planet and its people. So ultimately, you know, I have trust in people, and I don't think I could do this if I didn't. And you know, it's not. I think that fatalism is appealing to some people, but I feel like I owe it to myself and to people who are struggling right now. You know, it'd be quite easy for me to sit in the position that I'm in right now and say, you know, oh yeah, everything's really terrible, but who cares? Because I have quite a comfortable life. But there are people who are struggling and fighting for survival. And I feel like, you know, all of us across society owe it to them to actually have hope and to try and struggle for them to end their suffering. I think that is a really important thing that we do, and that we don't just essentially write their lives away as if there's nothing that can be done for them. You know, we need to ensure that we are really having everyone's contributions and their abilities to change society respected and upheld, and that we are across society, you know, doing what needs to be done. That doesn't just come down to business, that comes down to all of us to hold each other accountable. So, yeah.
Thank you. And indeed, that brings me to the last question I'd like to ask all of the panelists. And when it's down to us as people, I would love to also hear from you what your personal wish would be in the context of plastic waste, and what you would love to see as the next chapter. So shall I start with, this time with Eric, please? Can you express your wish in only a minute, please?
Yes, I'll try, and I think it can be made quite simple. I want us as a society, as Lola says, to create a system that doesn't leak plastic into nature, where we're not about to drown in plastics, as the film that we started with illustrated so clearly. And I think that would mean quite radical change from all actors. But what is sure is that I think this session definitely gives me hope.
Very quickly then to Eva, your wish, very short and sharply, please.
I wish that the way we all consume is by default sustainable, meaning the cheapest, most convenient, most desirable products are also the most sustainable ones. And that includes the way they're produced, used, and disposed of. That would be my wish.
Excellent.
But I think it's going to happen.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you. Willemijn, please.
And what I wish is actually that there's not going to be any more need for cleanup companies because there's no more leakage. And if you create a system that is set up right for no more leakage, like zero leakage, then you don't need any cleanups, and you can actually thrive as a whole and create a living ocean and a living planet for future generations.
Thank you. Lola?
Yeah, my wish is quite similar, that those who are the ones that are creating the waste that we're currently seeing take responsibility, and that we stop the production of waste at the start, that we go all the way to the top of the stream, and that those who are responsible take responsibility for what they're creating, that we make them pay, and we create systems that make them pay, so that we don't have to be constantly doing the cleanup on the other end and trying to manage the impact, that we stop things at the start.
Yeah. And I give the last word to the Director General. Florica, what would be your personal wish?
Personally, I would put that aside, but I would rather say think globally and act locally. And think globally for me means we will go for and support definitely what Eric was saying as a global agreement on plastics. And when you think and when you act locally, there are changes that we can do. Think just about the plastic bag directive where we introduced just a tiny fee and it had an effect. And I would also say, especially now after COVID, where a lot of people have lost their job, that business and also us from the regulator side, we demonstrate that by reducing plastics, by recycling plastics, by preventing all of this, there are job opportunities for the high skilled and for the low skilled, because that's what we also now need. So there's also an economic story to say, and if we were to act on all of this, and I'm more with Eva, what she has said, everybody would probably contribute also personally.
Yep, absolutely. And that brings us, dear viewers, to the end of this session. It's been a very rich discussion, and thank you for the questions. Thank you to the panelists for your valuable contributions. I think what we have seen shining through is that there is a groundswell in society to do something about plastic waste. We have the opportunity, actually more than an opportunity, to duty, to take that and use that to drive the positive change we want to see. And as we heard from Eva and others, and Willemijn, of course, we don't need to start from scratch. There are solutions already available. There are businesses with very high standards. We, as each of us, every individual can vote with their wallet to vote for those higher standards, but we can also vote in different ways. We can also vote for governments that want to make that change happen and want to drive that towards a global treaty which sets the right standards and helps business as well to move to more ambitious targets. We all have a role to play. It's important for the Earth. It's important for society. I hope this session has inspired you to take that action, to join the movement. And with that, I hope that within not too long distant future, we will enable Mandy to start taking pictures of lovely flowers again because she's running out of plastic waste material. And with that, I'd like to turn quickly to Sylvia to see what she's made of her final picture of this session. And oh wow, yeah, that is incredible. I am sure this wraps it up and this captures the discussion so well. I hope that we can share this all on our channels, and I'd like to thank you for that, Sylvia. I also like to thank the audience, the technicians, and I'd love to, my final words of thanks, of course, goes to the production company and Mandy Barker for the wonderful documentary Trapped by Plastic. And with that, thank you and see you again.